Imagine discovering a long-lost letter that could change everything you thought you knew about one of the most important figures in history. What if I told you that there is a letter written by an eyewitness who knew Jesus Christ that describes in detail what he actually looked like? For centuries, artists, historians, and theologians have debated the appearance of Jesus. The images of him are as varied as the cultures that revere him. But this letter, attributed to the Roman governor Lentulus, offers something entirely different, a first-hand description from someone who encountered Jesus in the flesh. In today's video, we're diving deep into this astonishing discovery. By the end of this video, your perception of what Jesus looked like might change forever. This isn't just a piece of trivia. It's a revelation that ties history, faith, and science together in an incredible way. We'll explore not only the letter's contents, but the implications it could have for how we understand Jesus, both as a historical figure and as a spiritual leader. And trust me, by the end, this journey through time will leave you with more than just answers. It may leave you with new questions about faith, history, and the power of images. Before we start, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You'll want to stay updated on the latest discoveries, especially as we dive into more historical and biblical mysteries. Let's get started. When you think of Jesus, what comes to mind? For most people, the image is instantly recognizable. Perhaps you see a man with fair skin, long flowing hair, and gentle blue eyes, a serene figure dressed in robes, often portrayed with a glowing halo around his head. These images of Jesus, popularized in countless artworks, movies, and stained glass windows, have shaped our collective memory. They evoke a sense of peace, love, and divinity. But where did these images come from? And more importantly, are they accurate? The truth is, the picture of Jesus that most of us have in our minds is far from the historical reality. It's a product of centuries of artistic interpretation, theological reflection, and cultural influences. In fact, the Bible, the primary source of information about Jesus' life, offers very little detail about his physical appearance. Unlike many prominent figures from history, Jesus was not described in a way that would allow us to easily recognize him. There are no mentions of his height, hair color, or facial features in the Gospels. This absence has opened the door to a wide array of representations, each shaped by the times and places in which they were created. Throughout history, artists and theologians have filled in the gaps based on their own experiences and cultural contexts. In early Christian art, Jesus was often depicted as a young, beardless man, more closely resembling a Roman philosopher than the iconic image we recognize today. As Christianity spread, so too did the image of Jesus, evolving to reflect the characteristics valued by different cultures. By the time of the Byzantine Empire, Jesus was often depicted with a long beard, symbolizing wisdom and authority. During the Renaissance, European artists like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo contributed to the familiar, almost otherworldly representations of Jesus with fair skin and delicate features that we see in Western art today. But there's a fundamental question that needs to be asked. Did Jesus actually look like this? Did he have the fair skin and soft features that so many of these images suggest? Or have we, over the centuries, created a picture of Jesus that reflects more about us than it does about him? One of the reasons we don't know exactly what Jesus looked like is that, unlike many important figures from antiquity, there are no contemporary descriptions of his appearance in the Bible. The Gospels, which serve as the primary source of information about his life and teachings, are almost completely silent on this point. It's curious because many ancient texts, even religious ones, often provide at least some description of notable figures. For example, the Hebrew Bible describes the physical attributes of Saul and David, two of Israel's great kings. Yet when it comes to Jesus, the focus of the New Testament remains entirely on his teachings and deeds, leaving the physical image of Jesus largely to the imagination of his followers. Early Christian writers such as Justin Martyr and Origen grappled with this absence of description. They suggested that Jesus' appearance was not important for his mission. Some, like St. Augustine, even speculated that Jesus might have been deliberately unremarkable in appearance, so that people would focus on his message rather than his looks. There is, however, one intriguing passage from the book of Isaiah, often cited by early Christians, which refers to the Messiah as having no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. This description suggests that in contrast to the heroic or godlike depictions common in ancient art, Jesus may have been an ordinary-looking man, someone who didn't stand out because of his appearance, but rather because of his actions. And yet, despite this ambiguity in the biblical record, various descriptions of Jesus did emerge in early Christian writings and later traditions. One of the most fascinating and mysterious comes from a letter attributed to a Roman official named Lentulus. According to this account, Jesus was a man of striking appearance, tall, with a commanding presence, yet serene and gentle. His hair was described as chestnut-colored and flowing, parted in the middle in the style of the Nazarenes. His eyes were said to be piercing, with a hint of blue, and his face was marked by a calm dignity. This description paints a vivid picture, far removed from the simple carpenter from Galilee we often imagine. But is it true? The letter, which purports to describe Jesus in such detail, is surrounded by mystery and debate. It's important to note that there are questions about the authenticity of the letter and whether it was indeed written by Lentulus. Some scholars believe it may have been a later fabrication, created by medieval writers who sought to provide a more tangible image of Jesus for their readers. However, others argue that, even if the letter isn't entirely authentic, it reflects early Christian traditions about Jesus' appearance that have since been lost or forgotten. Regardless of its authenticity, the letter offers a fascinating glimpse into how early Christians may have envisioned Jesus. It adds another layer to the ongoing mystery of his appearance, one that has intrigued believers and scholars alike for centuries. The letter attributed to Aurelius Linus, or Lentulus, offers what might be the most detailed description of Jesus, a physical portrayal that stands in stark contrast to the artistic images we've seen throughout history. According to the letter, Jesus was a figure of extraordinary beauty, tall and dignified. His hair, described as chestnut-colored and smooth, fell over his shoulders and parted in the middle, a common style among the Nazarenes of the time. The letter also mentions that his beard was full and the same color as his hair, slightly lighter towards the ends, giving a natural, rugged look to his appearance. His eyes, perhaps the most captivating part of the description, were said to be large and expressive, a deep, mysterious shade that drew people in, giving him an aura of wisdom and compassion. His skin is described as having an olive complexion, typical of people from the Middle East during that era, which challenges the common Western depictions of a pale-skinned Jesus. The letter goes on to describe his stature as tall, lean, and commanding, yet his demeanor as humble and serene. It is said that his presence was enough to inspire awe, even without him uttering a word. His posture, his movements, everything about him seemed to convey a sense of purpose and authority. But of course, such a letter has sparked endless debate. Could this really be an accurate description of Jesus? Or is it simply another layer of mythology that developed around him in the centuries after his death? To answer that, we must consider not only the historical and textual evidence, but also the context in which such descriptions might have emerged. During the early Christian period, there was a desire among followers to know more about the man they revered, not just spiritually, but physically as well. The letter attributed to Lentulus might be seen as an attempt to satisfy this desire, offering a portrait of Jesus that could be embraced by early believers, particularly those in the Roman Empire, who might have been more accustomed to detailed physical descriptions of their leaders and gods. Regardless of its authenticity, The letter paints a vivid picture of a man who left an indelible mark on those who saw him. For centuries, historians and theologians have analyzed this letter, trying to determine its origin and credibility. Some argue that it could be a later medieval fabrication, designed to meet the growing curiosity of Christians who sought a more tangible connection to Jesus. Others suggest that, even if the letter itself is not authentic, it may reflect early oral traditions about Jesus' appearance that were passed down through generations before being recorded. In any case, the letter serves as a fascinating piece of historical evidence, one that invites us to question how much of what we believe about Jesus' appearance is rooted in fact, and how much is influenced by the art and culture that followed. Modern science has given us another tool to investigate what Jesus may have looked like: forensic anthropology. Perhaps the most famous artifact associated with Jesus is the Shroud of Turin, a piece of cloth that many believe bears the image of his crucified body. While the authenticity of the shroud has been a matter of intense debate, it has nonetheless sparked scientific interest, particularly among forensic experts who have attempted to recreate Jesus' appearance based on the image imprinted on the cloth. The Shroud of Turin depicts a man who was crucified with wounds on his hands, feet, and side, wounds that align with the biblical accounts of Jesus' crucifixion. Forensic scientists such as Professor Giovanni Giudica Cordelia have studied the dimensions and features of the figure on the shroud, using advanced imaging technology to create a three-dimensional model of the man's face and body. According to their studies, the man depicted on the shroud was about 5 feet 7 inches tall, with a muscular build and features typical of someone from the Middle East during the 1st century. The face on the shroud has been the subject of countless reconstructions, with experts using computer software to estimate what the man would have looked like in life. These reconstructions generally depict a man with dark, curly hair, a full beard, and a strong, well-defined jawline. His skin tone is darker than the fair-skinned Jesus often seen in Western art, more in line with the appearance of a 1st century Jewish man. While these forensic studies can't definitively prove that the man depicted on the Shroud of Turin is Jesus, they offer a scientifically grounded image that aligns more closely with historical and cultural contexts. The forensics suggest a man who was physically strong, with a rugged, weathered appearance, likely a reflection of the harsh conditions in which he lived and traveled. Jesus, after all, was a carpenter by trade, and spent much of his ministry walking long distances across the rugged terrain of Galilee and Judea. It's reasonable to assume that he would have had the appearance of a laborer, not the soft, ethereal figure often portrayed in art. Beyond the Shroud of Turin, forensic anthropologists have also used skeletal remains from the region to create models of what a typical man from Jesus' time and place might have looked like. These reconstructions, based on skulls found in archaeological sites, depict men with broad faces, dark hair, and olive or darker skin tones. They are a far cry from the Europeanized images of Jesus that have dominated Western art for centuries. Instead, these models show a man who would have blended in with the population of 1st century Judea, rather than standing out as an outsider with pale skin and delicate features. Artistic depictions of Jesus have evolved dramatically over the centuries, shaped by the cultures and societies that produced them. In the earliest days of Christianity, images of Jesus were rare, as early Christians were often persecuted and the focus was more on his teachings than his appearance. When Jesus did begin to be depicted in art, he was often shown as a youthful, beardless figure, resembling a Roman philosopher or even the god Apollo. This portrayal emphasized his role as a teacher and spiritual guide, rather than his physical likeness. As Christianity became more established, particularly in the Byzantine Empire, images of Jesus began to take on a more regal and divine appearance. Byzantine artists often depicted Jesus with a long beard and flowing robes, seated on a throne or holding a book, symbolizing his authority as the ruler of heaven and earth. These images were meant to convey his divine nature, rather than his human form, and they were often stylized to reflect the theological beliefs of the time. During the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, Jesus' image continued to evolve. In Europe, artists like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo depicted Jesus as a pale-skinned, almost ethereal figure, with delicate features and flowing hair. These images were heavily influenced by the aesthetics of the time, which idealized beauty and often depicted religious figures in a way that reflected the nobility and grace of the ruling classes. Jesus was portrayed not just as a man, but as a symbol of divine perfection, with every detail carefully crafted to evoke a sense of holiness and reverence. One of the most iconic images of Jesus from the 20th century is Warner Sallman's Head of Christ. Painted in 1940, this image has become one of the most widely recognized depictions of Jesus, particularly in the United States. Sallman's painting shows Jesus with flowing brown hair, soft features, and a serene, almost otherworldly expression. It became incredibly popular in churches, homes, and religious institutions, shaping the way millions of people imagine Jesus. However, like many depictions of Jesus, it reflects more of the cultural and racial context of the time than the historical reality of a first-century Jewish man. As Christianity spread across the globe, different cultures began to depict Jesus in ways that reflected their own identities and experiences. In Africa, Asia, and Latin America, artists created images of Jesus that aligned more closely with the physical traits of the local populations. In Africa, for example, Jesus is often depicted with dark skin and African features, symbolizing his connection to the people of that region. In Japan, artists have portrayed Jesus with Asian features, reflecting the idea that Jesus is a universal figure who transcends race and ethnicity. These depictions demonstrate the adaptability of Jesus' image, showing how different cultures have embraced him as one of their own. The diversity of images underscores the idea that Jesus, as a spiritual figure, belongs to all people, regardless of their background or appearance. These cross-cultural representations of Jesus not only reflect the universality of his message, but also the deep connection that different communities feel with him. As Christianity spread to different parts of the world, Jesus' image began to take on a wide array of physical features, colors, and cultural traits. These depictions reflect not only the universality of his message, but also the deep cultural adaptations that allowed Jesus to become accessible and relatable to people in vastly different regions. In many ways, how a culture envisions Jesus is a mirror to its own identity and values. Each adaptation tells a story about how these communities connected with his teachings and made them their own. For instance, in Africa, where Christianity spread both through European colonization and the work of African missionaries, the depiction of Jesus often transformed into an image that mirrored the people who worshipped him. Paintings and statues in African churches show Jesus with dark skin, curly hair, and distinctly African facial features. This shift in imagery was not just a reaction to European portrayals of Jesus, but a reclamation of religious identity. It reflected the understanding that Jesus, as a figure of salvation and redemption, belonged to all people, not just those who fit the European mold. In fact, this evolution of Jesus' image became particularly important in African American churches in the United States during the 19th and 20th centuries. As African Americans sought to reclaim their religious and cultural identity amidst systemic racism and segregation, the portrayal of a black Jesus became a powerful symbol of resistance and hope. For African American Christians, a black Jesus symbolized that God understood and empathized with their suffering. It connected Jesus' own experiences of oppression with the struggles of marginalized people in modern times. This portrayal empowered believers, reminding them that salvation was not reserved for a single race or culture, but was open to everyone. Similar transformations took place in Asia, where Christianity encountered long-standing religious traditions and distinct cultural aesthetics. In Japan, for example, artists have portrayed Jesus with more Asian features, making him look like a local sage rather than a figure foreign to the land. His robes resemble traditional Japanese clothing, and his face takes on the softer, serene expressions seen in Buddhist iconography. These depictions not only made Jesus more relatable, but also helped bridge the gap between Christianity and Japan's indigenous religious practices. The image of Jesus as a suffering servant, familiar in Christian teachings, also resonated with the Buddhist ideal of the compassionate bodhisattva, a being who delays enlightenment to help others. In Latin America, particularly in regions influenced by indigenous cultures, Jesus has often been portrayed with darker skin tones, symbolizing solidarity with the poor and oppressed. This representation, which emerged during periods of colonization and later social struggles, was particularly significant in communities suffering under economic hardship or political tyranny. Jesus became a figure of liberation, a savior who understood the plight of the downtrodden and called for justice. The merging of traditional Catholic imagery with indigenous symbols of strength and resistance is seen in Latin American churches, where depictions of Jesus can incorporate elements of native dress, landscapes, and cultural motifs. This blending of Christian and indigenous iconography allowed people to see Jesus not as an outsider, but as someone who walked alongside them in their daily lives. In India, Christianity is a minority religion, yet it has produced vibrant and unique depictions of Jesus that reflect the deep spiritual traditions of the land. In Indian Christian art, Jesus is often depicted with features resembling those of Indian holy men, with brown skin and sometimes even dressed in local attire such as a dhoti. His teachings of love and selflessness are presented in ways that resonate with the teachings of Hinduism and Buddhism, creating a connection between Christian faith and India's rich religious tapestry. In some cases, Jesus is portrayed with the markings of a yogi, emphasizing his spiritual enlightenment and his role as a teacher of divine wisdom. This blending of Christian and Hindu symbolism helps Indian Christians see Jesus as both a historical figure and a divine teacher who transcends religious boundaries. These cross-cultural depictions of Jesus highlight a crucial point. The image of Jesus is not static. It has evolved and adapted over time, reshaped by the people who encountered him through the lens of their own experiences. This flexibility is perhaps one of the reasons Christianity has been able to spread and take root in so many different parts of the world. Jesus is not confined to one image, ethnicity, or race. Instead, his message and his image transcend borders, making him a universal figure who can be embraced by people from all walks of life. The theological implications of Jesus' physical appearance go far beyond mere aesthetics. For early Christians, the question of what Jesus looked like was not as important as the message he delivered and the divine truth he embodied. In fact, the earliest Christians were reluctant to depict Jesus in any form, physical or otherwise, due to religious prohibitions against making images. This reluctance stemmed from the Jewish tradition of aniconism, the avoidance of physical representations of the divine. For Jews and early Jewish Christians, God was beyond human comprehension and could not be captured in an image. Thus, the idea of depicting Jesus, who was seen as the Son of God, would have seemed irreverent or even blasphemous. Early Christian writings, especially those from the first few centuries, reflect this focus on the spiritual rather than the physical. Jesus' teachings about love, compassion, and forgiveness were what mattered most. His physical appearance in this context was seen as irrelevant. What was important was his role as the Savior, the one who would reconcile humanity with God. This idea is underscored by the absence of physical descriptions of Jesus in the Gospels. The authors of the New Testament were not concerned with providing a detailed portrait of Jesus' appearance. Instead, they focused on his words and actions, which they believed revealed his true nature as the Messiah. This focus on the spiritual over the physical also influenced early Christian art, particularly in the Eastern Orthodox tradition. Icons of Jesus, often called Christ Pantocrator, depict him in a stylized, almost abstract way, emphasizing his divinity rather than his humanity. These images are meant to convey theological truths rather than provide a realistic depiction of Jesus' earthly form. His face is often shown as solemn and powerful, with exaggerated features that emphasize his role as the judge of all creation. The use of gold backgrounds and flat two-dimensional styles in these icons serves to highlight his divine nature, creating a sense of otherworldliness that transcends human understanding. This emphasis on the divine also explains why, in many early depictions, Jesus is shown without specific ethnic features. He is often portrayed as a universal figure, representing all of humanity rather than a single group. This universality is one of the core theological tenets of Christianity, that Jesus came to save all people, regardless of their background, ethnicity, or social status. His message of salvation is meant for everyone, and his image in this context is meant to reflect that inclusiveness. However, over time, as Christianity spread and became more integrated into different cultures, this early reluctance to depict Jesus gave way to more localized interpretations. In some cases, these depictions served to reinforce the idea that Jesus belonged to a particular people or nation, while in others, they were simply a way of making him more relatable to believers. Even though these images often emphasize different physical characteristics, the underlying theological message remained the same. Jesus was the divine Son of God, sent to redeem humanity. Interestingly, the debates over Jesus' appearance also touch on deeper theological questions about the nature of Christ. Was Jesus more divine or more human? How do we reconcile his earthly form with his heavenly origin? These questions have been the subject of theological debate for centuries, with different Christian traditions emphasizing different aspects of Jesus' nature. For some, depicting Jesus in human form is a way of emphasizing his humanity, his ability to relate to the suffering and struggles of ordinary people. For others, images of Jesus should focus on his divinity, reminding believers that he is not just a man, but also God incarnate. In the end, what becomes clear is that Jesus' physical appearance, while fascinating to explore, ultimately pales in comparison to his spiritual significance. Whether depicted as a dark-skinned man from Africa, an Asian sage, or a European figure with flowing hair, Jesus' true essence lies not in how he looked, but in what he taught. His message of love, compassion, forgiveness, and redemption transcends all physical boundaries, touching the hearts of millions across the globe. For Christians, the promise of seeing Jesus face to face is not about finally discovering what he looked like, but about experiencing his presence in a way that transcends earthly limitations. The ultimate hope is that believers will one day stand before Jesus, not as a figure confined by time, space, or culture, but as the eternal and divine Son of God, who welcomes all into his embrace. In this sense, the endless variety of depictions of Jesus serves as a reminder of his boundless love, his universal message, and his ability to connect with people from every corner of the earth. In the end, while the curiosity around Jesus' physical appearance continues to fascinate historians, theologians, and believers alike, what remains clear is that his outward features are secondary to the impact of his life, his teachings, and his role as the central figure in Christianity. Theological discussions around Jesus' appearance have always emphasized that what matters most is not how he looked, but the spiritual truth he embodied. From the earliest days of the Christian faith, Jesus' teachings have transcended race, ethnicity, and culture, making him a figure whose importance goes far beyond physical characteristics. The early Christians, particularly those who were closest to his time, understood that focusing on his appearance was missing the point of his ministry. Jesus' message was one of universal love, compassion, and forgiveness, a message that could touch the hearts of people regardless of their background or physical traits. This theological perspective is reflected in the way Jesus was perceived by early Christian communities. He was seen first and foremost as the Son of God, whose divine mission was to reconcile humanity with the Creator. The absence of detailed descriptions of his appearance in the New Testament reflects the early Christians' understanding that Jesus' physical attributes were irrelevant compared to the transformative power of his teachings. His impact on the world was not due to his appearance, but to his message and the hope he brought to countless people. The early followers focused on his words and actions, which they believed revealed his true nature as the Messiah, rather than getting bogged down by superficial details. For many early Christians, the idea of depicting Jesus in any form was controversial. It wasn't until centuries later that representations of Jesus began to emerge, primarily as a way to express theological truths. The physical image of Jesus became a medium through which the church could convey deeper spiritual meanings. The images created were not meant to provide a historically accurate portrayal, but rather to symbolize Jesus' divine role and mission. Icons of Jesus, especially in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, are not just art, but sacred images meant to help believers connect with the divine. These icons are intentionally stylized to emphasize Jesus' spiritual qualities rather than his human features. His face is often shown with a solemn, otherworldly expression, conveying his dual nature as both fully human and fully divine. But the evolution of Jesus' image from these early icons to the various depictions we see today, across different time periods, cultures, and artistic styles, reflects something profound about humanity's relationship with Jesus. Every culture and every generation that has embraced Christianity has sought to depict Jesus in a way that resonates with their own understanding of his message and identity. Whether he is portrayed with African, Asian, Latin American, or European features, the essence of Jesus' representation has always been more about his role as the savior of humanity than the specific details of his physical appearance. However, these cultural adaptations also carry theological implications that have sparked debates within Christianity over the centuries. On the one hand, portraying Jesus in various ways shows his accessibility to all people, reflecting the core Christian belief that Jesus is the savior for all of humanity, regardless of race or culture. On the other hand, some have argued that certain portrayals, particularly those that emphasize a European-looking Jesus, can obscure the historical reality of his Middle Eastern origins and contribute to misconceptions about his identity. Throughout history, many theologians have emphasized that the most important aspect of Jesus' identity is not what he looked like, but what he represented. His message of love, redemption, and salvation transcends any physical depiction. In fact, many early Christian theologians, such as St. Augustine, argued that focusing on Jesus' physical appearance detracted from his divine nature. According to Augustine, Jesus' outward form was deliberately ordinary so that people would focus on his teachings and the inner transformation he brought, rather than be distracted by his physical presence. This emphasis on Jesus' inner qualities rather than his outward appearance is a recurring theme in Christian theology. The New Testament itself points to the fact that Jesus was not necessarily distinguished by his looks, but by his wisdom, his compassion, and his unique connection with God. The Gospels present Jesus as someone who moved people with his words and actions, not by his physical presence. His miracles, his parables, and his acts of love and mercy are what captivated the crowds and turned ordinary people into his devoted followers. In this light, Discussions about Jesus' appearance, while interesting, ultimately pale in comparison to the theological significance of his life and message. What Jesus looked like becomes less important when we consider the profound impact he has had on billions of people throughout history. The legacy he left behind, the spiritual transformation he offered, and the hope he brought to the world are what matter most. As Christians believe, Jesus' teachings have transcended time and space, touching the hearts of people across all cultures and eras. His message of love, forgiveness, and eternal life continues to inspire and uplift people regardless of their background or appearance. What Jesus offers is not a specific image to emulate, but a way of life, a path to spiritual fulfillment, and a promise of salvation. This theological perspective is also reflected in the Christian belief in the resurrection. For many Christians, the hope is not just to know about Jesus or to imagine what he looked like, but to one day meet him face to face in the afterlife. The promise of seeing Jesus in his glorified form, beyond any earthly description, offers a source of hope and comfort to millions of believers. It is this spiritual encounter that transcends any need for a physical depiction of Jesus. In the end, the importance of Jesus' appearance lies not in the specific details, but in the way that different cultures and communities have embraced him as their own. Whether depicted as an African, Asian, Middle Eastern, or European figure, Jesus represents the divine connection between humanity and God. His image is a reflection of the profound truth that his message belongs to everyone. The diversity of images and portrayals of Jesus across the world highlights the adaptability and universality of his message. As Christians believe, Jesus came not just for one group of people, but for all humanity. The fact that his image can take on so many forms is a testament to the enduring power of his teachings and the way they have resonated with people from every corner of the globe. As we reflect on the countless ways Jesus has been depicted throughout history, it becomes clear that the ultimate importance lies not in the outward details, but in the inward transformation that his message offers. The diversity of Jesus' portrayals serves as a reminder that his love and salvation are available to everyone, regardless of their race, culture, or background. So while historians and scientists may continue to explore what Jesus looked like, and artists may continue to depict him in various forms, what matters most is the spiritual connection that people feel with him. Jesus' appearance may have varied in the eyes of different cultures, but his message of love, hope, and redemption remains constant. As we conclude this exploration into the various depictions of Jesus and the ongoing mystery of his appearance, it's important to remember that our focus should ultimately be on his teachings and the faith he inspires in billions of people worldwide. The image of Jesus, though fascinating, is secondary to the legacy of love and spiritual transformation he left behind. If you found this journey into the history and theology of Jesus' appearance interesting, make sure to check out more of our videos, exploring other fascinating topics related to history, faith, and culture. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you can stay updated with our latest content. There's so much more to discover, and we'd love to have you join us on this incredible journey of learning and exploration.